Welcome to episode 44 of the Breakneck Podcast. And we're going to do a bit of a year in review episode. Slightly different structure. So we're going to hit up 3 questions. So Matt, listen intently here, please. You'll get to go first. What do you know now that you didn't know at the start of the year about AI is one. Who are going to be the winners of 2026 in the AI world, and who are going to be the losers of 2026? So 3 questions. We'll try and stick to that a little bit, but where do you want to start?
Well, I'll start in order. So what do I know now that I didn't know at the beginning of the year? And when we started this podcast, our first episode, we talked about agents. And in particular, we defined agents by essentially how much autonomy they had so that they could make decisions on their own to accomplish a goal. And for me, and we set this criteria very clearly, was agents will have succeeded in 2025 if by the end of the year, which we're now a few days away from, we saw people interacting with AI not as a tool that they had a subscription to, but rather they would just say, here's a budget, and let the agent spend down that budget on tokens or purchasing things or whatever in order to accomplish a goal. And the idea is that, companies are, for some reason, happy to pay people. I've seen meetings that were just kind of like fluff that were $1,000, in terms of the people in them and costs. And companies do that constantly. Like every day there's $1,000 meeting 1,000,000 times a day, right? But the number of times I've seen someone given $1,000 just to independently go see if they can generate a solution is very low. And I think that's where we end the year is where we began, which is no one is trusting people. And I think I've expanded it. No one's trusting AI as agents, but also we really don't see people being trusted as agents very often either. When was the last time somebody gave you, $5,000 and said, Ian, go nuts, see what you can do?
Well, maybe not $5,000, but if you're interested in that question, we delve much deeper in the agentic commerce.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of places where we have agents. I mean, agents only, originally an agent was a human, right? So there's a bunch of places. But let's hold off on that because I want to go deeper on that one. So you're saying that's the thing that you hoped would change but hasn't changed in
That's the thing that I didn't know. And I've legitimately thought that by the end of the year, I would be putting in, hey, here's $20, go spend it and give me whatever you don't spend. But here's $20, try to go solve this problem. And we really never got there. No one's pushing that style of agent. They'll maybe give more authority to agents. And we're starting to see agents getting used qua agents. Is like, here's a goal, go work towards it. But mostly we're still in the phase at the end of 2025 that we were at the beginning, which is building out infrastructure in order to achieve this future. I still believe that that's what's going to happen, but my standard was: are there any agents that you give a credit card to, and then just go do this for me? And that hasn't happened, in my opinion.
Okay, I'll give you my ones. You and I were having a conversation almost this day last year. And it was a sequence of meetings that we had where we realized we needed to start the podcast. But one of the considerations and frankly concerns in my mind was, crap, what is this AI thing going to do for society, for everything? And the concern boiled down to one thing, which was speed, aka how much time do we as society have to kind of react to this thing changing our world? So that was the start of the year. And what I now know at the end of the year is, first of all, AI in and of itself isn't progressing ridiculously quickly. I think it's not quite as quick as we thought it might be, but actually it is blocked now by us as humans. So we're not on AI clock speed, we're on human clock speed. What do I mean by that? It's about how quickly can this technology diffuse into our, let's limit to the work world. It's back to exactly where we were before. It's change management, it's digital transformation. We have these awesome, interesting tools that we as humans and businesses who have existing business workflows and outcomes we want are now having to do. One of my customers described it as the brain damage of going, oh, okay, this thing can do this amazing thing. Now, how the heck do we actually begin to allow that to diffuse? So that's my number one learning. I think that will continue far. We said it multiple times. If AI technology stopped right now, still going to take many, many years for us to absorb and diffuse that into our workflows. So
I
AI
would
speed
think it
isn't the
doesn't take
concern, human
many,
is.
many years, but I think you're right. I think it's going to take many, many years. Um, I feel like we do this podcast, and as a hype for our listeners, we do talk about stuff, and I've been talking about for months Notebook LM. We've been having back and forth about it, and recently, within the last 2 months, it enabled the ability to write slide decks automatically. I've talked about it on the podcast, and you've heard me talk about it. So I feel like, oh, everybody should know about this. Obviously, like that's 2 months ago on the podcast that we talked about that. I talked to a friend this morning with a very interesting data use case. I said, you got to dump that into Notebook LM and see what happens. And the result was so striking. Essentially, a presentation of such high quality. And when I say a presentation of very high quality, I mean something that you would pay McKinsey and Company easy $50K for, right? That was a rule. As a consultant, here's a rule I learned once. If you are paid by the CEO of a company to deliver a report that sits on his desk, the minimum price is $50,000, right? So when I see a fantastic deck and I think, oh man, what if we sold that to the CEO of a public company? I saw in 25 minutes that you let LLM run, Notebook LM run, a successful $50K consulting agreement come out the door. And so, that's my view on the industry. There's these enormous, enormous opportunities in just communicating and setting the baseline.
So great place to start talking about the winners for 2026, Matt. We know you're a fan of Notebook LM. Is that your winner, or what's your prediction?
I don't have Google as a winner. I do have them as my favorite, as some of my favorites, but I think the winners in 2026 are going to be companies. I'll make it conditional because I'm a coward, but if the AI bubble doesn't collapse, then much more energy is going to have to be put into the application layer, into those people who are researching and diffusing the technology, especially in enterprise, because what needs to happen for the infrastructure bets to pay off is that a whole bunch of cash starts getting produced from these investments. Because right now, people are selling inference at a loss. Like they might not be even paying the power bills, let alone paying for these NVIDIA chips, right? And so the whole expectation is there's been this huge build out, and in 2026, there's going to be even more build out planned. And either those chips start doing things that make a lot of money, and the current status quo is they're not making very much money. They're making an enormous amount of money in kind of like startup terms, like, OpenAI says they're going to do $13 billion in revenue this year, and I'm sure they're going to triple it next year. Anthropic's gone from like $0 to $10 billion in 1 year. These are incredible numbers, but if you're selling $1 for 35 cents, they're not actually that impressive, right? Anybody can go and say, oh, you want to use our inference and it'll cost you less than it'll cost you yourself. Like you can go sell a lot of something. And so what we need to see is not just higher revenue, but cash being thrown off that can pay for these bonds and this debt that is paying for this. So if that's the bubble, right? There's been a $30 billion data center in Louisiana for Meta. Either cash starts getting thrown off by this thing, or that $30 billion of debt and equity is going to go to zero. And that's bubble collapsing, or that's the negative downside. So either the bubble collapses, or the application layer is able to start to throw off huge amounts of cash. And so companies like Google with Notebook LM obviously have very cool technology, but I have not paid for Notebook LM, and I have not tripled my spend on Google Workspace, which is where I have Google, their spreadsheets and all that stuff. I'm not paying more for that. So where's the extra cash coming out of? And I think either application layer is going to be a huge winner in 2026, or it's an Armageddon for AI. And so I'm betting on AI, and I think the application layer will succeed.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, by the way. We've sort of skirted around that, but the application layer is probably going to has to be the winner for 2026. Otherwise, go back to the AI bubble episode to go deeper on that. I suppose I have hope for you, because my winner of 2026 is going to be agentic commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of alluded to agents earlier, you referenced agents. I think we are about ready, certainly in Silicon Valley and places where we're comfortable with technology, to start using agents to help buy us stuff. It's going to take a bunch of different shapes, but it's very natural to me that if you're comfortable using ChatGPT and you are researching a present for a gift for your college kid or your grandma or your whatever, or for yourself, that you would go there and then you skip all the advertising and all the bullshit. You have a trusted advisor in ChatGPT, if it's ChatGPT, and off you go and you make that purchase. What has been built this year is a bunch of the infrastructures, the protocol. Stripe, I think, is probably the leader in this. They've announced 3 different elements to put their suite together. Let's see, maybe summer of 2026 or maybe back to school 2026, I think, is when we'll see this really take off. So going back to your point about the application layer needing more demand, I think that's one place we'll begin to see more, on top of software engineers, customer support, and maybe a handful of others.
Yeah, I can imagine at this time of year, just before Christmas, an agent going to do my Christmas shopping and taking 10%. I would pay 10%.
Well, here's the fascinating thing. Uh, It's easy to say agentic commerce is going to be the winner. We have an internet that's optimized for an advertising type of a model, SEO, all that stuff. There's sort of equivalents of that, but I think the stack is going to change, right? So if you're paying $100, let's say you're selling $100 item, the jacket online. You're the vendor, the merchant. You're paying maybe $10 on advertising on average to convert somebody to purchase a thing, and then you're paying another 2.5% transaction fee for the payment. So you pay $12.50 of 100 to make a sale, and you get the remainder. Well, there is no advertising in this model, right? Because you're in ChatGPT, you go in, you ask for this thing, you do the discovery, you do the matching, you execute the transaction, and probably refunds and returns will probably be in that cycle as well. So that $10 of advertising you pay Google or Meta, that's maybe not all of it's up for grabs, but there's a question as to who takes that $10 and in what way or shape they take it. So, for example, if I was OpenAI, look, and we're not in the depths of their strategy, but I think if you put advertising in there right now, I think what you do is add friction, and you lose a bit of trust. I think it's much better to take a per transaction fee. And so you say to MasterCard, Visa, Stripe, whomever it may be, yeah, cool and everything, but you're going to charge 6% in total, and 3.5 of that is mine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and the thing about ads is ads aren't a general method of aggregating an audience or aggregating a customer base. There's something that's highly contingent on 2 things. There either is a website or media company who is capable of aggregating an audience that you can slot ads into, or there is a search phrase that users are already searching for. Right? And so while Google and Instagram have been fantastic at aggregating audiences, right, it still does require there to be kind of an existing. Instagram and TikTok actually are going a long way with the algorithmic feed of maybe being able to construct audiences. But even there, they're constructing that audience around people who like to watch influencer slop, which is not everybody. Like there's a very small number of people who spend a very large amount of time in various types of influencer, and that's going to determine the type of ad that you can place. Now you can do more about psychographics and stuff like that, but my point is, it's a pretty unsophisticated way of aggregating a group of people. Now imagine an agent who can actually go back and forth with that person, make suggestions, actually create inspiration for them. You can create a much more general and much finer grain construction of audiences who will consume a product. And I don't know if anything I said makes sense to people, but if you think about it, I used to work for News Corp as a consultant. and we help them build consumer data. And so if somebody went to Mansion Global, it's a very high-end real estate publication they do. It's really good, but it's like if you want to have a $20 million estate. Now, here's the thing. There's people like me who read about $20 million estates, and it's like, well, that's interesting. But then there's actually people who are buying $20 million estates. If you can figure out, oh, man, this person is reading Mansion Global from St. Tropez, and then the next day they're reading it from London, that's somebody who can, that ad unit is worth a fantastic amount, which is why News Corp, it continues to be a going concern, is that they've aggregated these in audiences. But like, it's a very chunky way to aggregate, obviously, a very high value. But they had to build a whole news vertical with newsrooms and executives, and spend many years building up the brand to build that that group of people. Agents and AI could do that at 1,000 times the granularity. You could have far more things, which means there's going to be products that aren't possible now that will be possible with agents. And so it's
That's a really
like,
good point. Yeah.
if you're OpenAI, how do you go find a set of things that can be sold where you're the only people on earth who can aggregate that audience because you've had all these conversations with someone that reveal like a psychographic profile of that person and their propensity to buy? That simply is not possible. And now you have 800 million users. You can go put together 20,000 people who have that, and you're the only one who can deliver that 20,000 people. Whereas News Corp would have to go build like, people who are into Dungeons and Dragons and are furries, or, whatever, like the weird thing that they're talking with their AI about
Yeah.
is not possible through the traditional audience aggregation means.
Yeah. And we tend to think right now, we talk right now about agentic commerce in the world of, say, ChatGPT or Gemini or something like that. But there are so many smaller sub communities that, like the Mansion one, for example, if you have that digital connection to that community, then there's sort of a lot more in context shopping that's going to happen. And we gave some examples, like, you're doing a travel list in Google Sheets because, you got all the stuff you need to pack and a couple of things you need to buy. In context, sunscreen is in there. The agent should just say, let me just buy that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Very simple example. I don't think we scratched the surface on that at all.
Mm-hmm.
We're also talking consumer versus business for the most part. Business is huge. Right, in terms, we know that, but business opportunity in terms of procurement and purchasing so I don't think we'll see a lot of that in 2026. I think it'll be consumer focused and a little bit more just in our existing large language model agents, but look for in context stuff to happen towards the back end of next year, 2026.
If we come back to this in 6 months, I think your bet is going to be agentic commerce, which you got me around on. I watched the episode. I was in it. I watched it again. I'm convinced. Agentic commerce has a lot. I would say diffusion of some very basic enterprise capabilities in 2026, because I am already so convinced that, for instance, slide decks is just it's a whole world. People paying for slide decks, people making slide decks, people created slide decks to pay people. Like, there's just slide decks everywhere. And that is just done. It's a solved problem. And even people that are very savvy, I'm showing it to them yesterday. Like, it's just we'll see that kind of stuff starting to diffuse very quickly, and that's going to cause a lot of changes.
Yeah, I mean, it feeds into, we'll jump on to the next question in a second, but it really feeds into some of the themes we talked about. We did a big episode on visuals generation, which fits into a bigger conversation around multimodal. This idea that we now get to consume information the way we want to consume it, whether that's written or video or visual or
Both
or
at the
static
same
visual.
time. Like, somebody walking through a deck is, Notebook LM has already delivered that.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I would say that the next thing they would do, and I'll be on a call with them a little bit later today, is having a conversation with somebody presenting a deck. Because, one of the things that we do at Pact is like we collect just enormous amounts of data, like far more data than we could ever use, right? In order to do what we need to do, which is very valuable. But then we're starting to play with that data set and say well, what would be the 10 other things that someone would want to do with it? And just having an agent who knows every single thing about a project, you can ask it all kinds of stuff. And
I don't think we understand how powerful that is. Like, I mentioned this another time, but being able to learn and absorb the information you want to absorb the way the way it clicks for you it's all about like how can we as quickly as possible in business communicate a piece of information that the other person can ingest and kind of absorb and understand. Sometimes it's written, sometimes it's whatever, sometimes I'm in the car, but we talked way back when about making Wikipedia interrogatable. Imagine having a conversation with Wikipedia.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I want
100%
to
with you.
read a book. I tend to read books where I don't know all the words in the book. Like just that. Like if you released a version of Kindle that I could chat with, like literally, like what's this word mean?
Yeah. Well, imagine podcasts like that where you're
Yeah.
like, and they mention a concept and you're like, sorry, Spotify, what is that concept? Give me it. I think I know what it is. What does it mean? And it
Yeah.
goes off and a 30-second tangent answer. Like, okay, cool. Back to the podcast, please.
Oh yeah. Here's a little nugget I think I've seen in the last few weeks. You send an email to somebody, right? The chances that they even acknowledge that they received the email is like 50-50. But like to actually know that they read it, they got it, to have any kind of understanding, or you create a deck for someone and send it to them. Like right now, and one of the problems that I've always wanted to solve with Pact is like make sure the people I sent a document to have read it. Right? I spent like 10 hours building a document for somebody, which now takes me like, I don't know, 30 minutes because it's a Notebook LM. But like, yeah, I would do this all the time in my earlier career. I'd create this huge doc, and then I meet with somebody 2 weeks later. I'm like, okay, so we put the deck together. Oh, sorry, I haven't got a chance to read that. I'm like, I spent the better part of 3 days preparing that document for you, and you didn't read it? Like, happened to me all the time. And so it's like just the act of making sure someone read it versus did they actually read it? Did they understand it? Did they have questions? Now you take that same document and presenting it as a static document, maybe they read it, maybe they didn't. If you present it as a conversation, now I can come back and say, okay, now tell me about how they responded to that. Well, they had some concerns that they didn't know, blah, blah, blah. And now let's say I have 20 people I need to present that to. If it were to do it in serial and I could release it to a few people first, iterate it, have their comments researched, updated, I, approve that, and then I send out to 3 or 4 more people, right? You could have like this incredibly, and that's a lot of times how I would send things. It's a huge amount of time on my part, send it to 2 people, get their feedback, meet with them, get deeper feedback, send it back out. All of that can be mediated. And when we talk about multimodal, right? Voice, presentation, images, text, all of those together, the idea that it can be a back and forth and we can actually collect huge amounts of data instead of just sending stuff out into the wind, like that's game changing. That was the big change in software. In the 90s, we used to send out CDs with software on them. You had no idea who used which features in it. You had no idea if it worked or didn't, if it had bugs. Maybe they called and they sent a postcard in saying your software doesn't work. And then around 2000, we kind of really switched the paradigm to where we would release SaaS. We would release software over the internet and we would see real-time stats. We would see bugs come in cold. We would see feature usage. We could iterate multiple times per month, right? And to the point where Facebook, famously releases like 1,000 times a day. We're going to say the same thing with our information culture within companies. It's going to go from creating information to like instantiating these kind of braided networks of people working together in these media information conversations.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Like I was thinking about Slack yesterday. I don't know why, and I was like, when we signed up for it in a different business maybe 10 years ago, and I was like, what problem was that solving? Because it feels like it is just Slack is the problem now. The problem it was solving is creating a pipe for a particular type of size of message or piece of information. So that's great. And now we all sit here and we look at Slack, and I killed a channel yesterday and felt good. I was like, oh, great. I don't have to deal with all that information. So now we have the conduits, we have the information flowing, but we don't have the ability to absorb, filter, understand as quickly as possible. And that's kind of the big challenge that AI begins to solve for us. So with that said, and we're not going to end on a bummer here because we've got a little bit more after this, but last question, who are going to be the losers of 2026, Matt?
So I put up names that bought a lot of assets, long-term assets, data centers, who there's not much upside on a data center, because if demand really comes for the data centers that are built now, it takes about 6 months to build a new data center, according to Jensen Huang. If Elon wanted to go out and build a data center, he can do it in 6 months. And they're spinning up all this stuff. And so it's limited upside, like a $30 billion data center in Louisiana. Limited upside. It might be a good asset, but the upside is going to be, a certain yield on that. You pay your bonds off and there's a little bit left over maybe. If there's too much left over, another data center gets built. So you're not going to ever get a 10x yield on that bet. Like you might with building an LLM, you go out, you put $1 billion into an LLM. Yeah, you might lose your $1 billion, but at the other side, you might get acquired for a $20 billion valuation, like we saw with Scale wasn't an LLM, but you can see these acquisitions. So like these big data center, they don't make sense to me. You're buying a long duration asset with short duration consumers. That's so somebody can come and buy, but if they find a better deal, they can leave. And so you owe that bond and that lease on that land and all your data center costs for 10 years. And any of your customers can just collapse or go away in 6 months. And so it looks a lot like WeWork, where they bought long-term leases on these big expensive buildings. For a while, they were full, and they're like, wow, this is great. We're getting 20% per year. Or like, let's go in. That's better than the stock market. Stock market's 7%. Let's do 20% with WeWork. But of course, as soon as the tide kind of fell back during COVID, where people didn't go into the office as much, they had these catastrophic long-term leases and all these liabilities, and all their customers were able to leave very quickly. So I don't like these giant data center plays. I think they're necessary, and maybe people are willing to take a loss and they'll invest through an instrument. And they're happy taking the loss elsewhere on their books instead of in their main Meta investment or whatever. But Oracle, Blue Owl, I don't know, CoreWeave and stuff like that. Like I don't love it. But again, I had the same thesis when NVIDIA was crossing 70. I'm like, there's no way that building GPUs is that hard. I felt like shorting at 70, and I was like, you're not a single stock investor. Don't do that. That's crazy. And now it's at 4x that. So I might be wrong, but
I'm with you, but not quite as strong on it. I don't think we're in a bubble. I think we're going to see a correction. What's different about all of this is we have demand. We hope that demand will continue to grow. And we've talked about the application layer being kind of the most important layer in 2026. For me, because you and I live in this space, we probably had 15 brilliant ideas for new products just in the episodes this year, distinct from what we actually do in our day jobs. So there's plenty more entrepreneurs out there like us that will find great killer apps in the application layer. The question for me is less about that. It's just more about the timing right now. And as you say, during the infrastructure layer, you have sort of fixed timing. You might have longer term leases from your, or deals from your bigger customers, but you're going to have a bunch of smaller startups in there who are essentially the application layer who may disappear. So I think the loser in 2026, we're going to see some corrections. I would bet somewhere it could be OpenAI because they're burning so much money, but I think ultimately it's going to be, as you say, in the infrastructure layer. Something's going to have to correct along there. But it's for me, correction, not a crash.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a crash. It's just too many things that already completely make sense. But again, the internet made sense probably in 1997, and then it could go
but the difference was the demand wasn't there.
It isn't going to crash in here, but what if it goes up another 3x, right? Like if you go, my one thing for historical perspective that I like to do regularly is go look at the NASDAQ on a logarithmic scale, but from 1975 until now. And it's a very nice exponential. And if you actually, on a logarithmic scale, you'll see an exponential is just a nice straight line. And so it goes in a nice straight line with a couple exceptions. There was this correction around 2000 where it went up, and then it came back down, and then it kind of went down below the exponential. So if you think of an exponential, just a straight line in logarithmic space, it went up, and then it crashed, and then it kind of came back to that line, it stuck to that line, and then after 2008, it went down below the line, and then kind of recovered, and now we're above the line. But if you look at how far above the line we are now versus how far above the line we were in 2000, it's not actually that high. And if you look at just like the deviation from what you would just expect, a nice exponential growth, which has been maintained for 40 years, why wouldn't that exponential correct? And I think we're maybe two years ahead of valuations from that perspective. So we might say have a flat market for a couple of years, but if it crashed, it would crash down to maybe 16, 17, which is bad from 24, say the NASDAQ, but like, it's like a 30% correction over 6 months. Like it would be bad, but it wouldn't be catastrophic and wouldn't be like the end of capitalism. The other thing is there's gigantic companies with tons of cash that are underwriting most of the investment. So, Google throws off an enormous amount of cash. TikTok is reporting $50 billion a year in profits this year. So when we hear about like, oh, it's going to be a $10 billion write-off, it's like TikTok made $50 billion in profit in 2025. Like, these are things that can be absorbed by these high cash flow businesses.
Yeah, and that's sort of another learning here. The hyperscalers are fueling probably 50, 60% of the demand, and they all have that cash. So they're okay. It's what happens to the other guys, the startup guys, if their demand evaporates and it hits the infrastructure guys. So, okay. So let's do a little review of the year for ourselves. So first of all, thanks to all the listeners. We love the feedback. Keep it coming and all of that. So we started this with an idea, and here we are, 44 episodes in. We do, just to give people some insight, we do about 10,000 views / listens / impressions across our different platforms. We're, according to Spotify, in their top 25% of all new podcasts in 2025, which is lovely for us to think about. So, Matt, I think it's been a good year for us in terms of Breakneck Podcast.
There are many, many things in my business that I have changed based off of our interviews and conversations, and I've just generally been much more aware. So either listen to the podcast or start your own podcast, as several of our guests have. The goal here was, this is changing too fast, and I wasn't really paying attention to AI quite close enough in 2024. And so I think we corrected that in 2025, and it's had really good payoffs in terms of added a lot of functionality, learned, I'm part of early access programs because I'm like, oh, I should go talk to that person. So very happy with 2025. Next year is probably going to be more fun for people like us than it was in 2025, though, because like you said, it's the entrepreneurs are getting squeezed pretty bad. There's a lot of venture money, but it's like, when there's a $6 billion round, it's like, that's not venture anymore. Like, we're talking about like funding ideas and not just like, major corporations doing infrastructure plays. So hopefully 2026 is a lot more fun for new ideas and product.
Yeah, and we need to give a quick congratulations to our first alumni acquisition of the Breakneck podcast. So Michael Core of Juro Labs, his business was acquired. So well done, Michael. So that's our first acquisition.
If we were a VC, like our payback
hit rate
would be pretty good right now.
Yeah, maybe
until Dwarkesh does a VC fund, I don't think we should. But I'm just saying, invest in companies that are on Breakneck.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. Well, Matt, thanks for being my partner in crime all year. Looking forward to 2026.
Looking forward to it, Ian.